Wyoming Territory, summer of 1882. The morning sky was a canvas of pale blue, sharp as shards of ice, and the wind whispered secrets carrying dust and the faint metallic tang of gun oil. Sylvie Gardner stood ramrod straight against the rough-hewn hitching post outside the Sweetwater Ridge General Store, her breath caught tight in her chest. The thundering cadence of her uncle's voice echoed through the warped wood of the door behind her. Inside, her uncle, Thomas Gardner, was locked in his habitual battle with the weary shopkeeper, his words laced with bitterness as he haggled over her mother's long-past debts he insisted Sylvie now bore. "You think I'll let her parade around town like she's entitled?" Thomas bellowed, his voice a raw rasp. "That girl has no claim to anything but what I see fit to provide, a roof, a plate, and the burden of my goodwill." Sylvie's jaw clenched, a familiar surge of defiance coursing through her veins. She was 21, a woman grown. Her mother had been gone 3 years, and since that day, Thomas had treated her like a stray dog he couldn't bring himself to put down. He was not blood, merely her mother's brother-in-law, but he clung to the house her mother left behind as if it were a king's ransom and wielded control over Sylvie as if she were an indentured servant. But that era was over. She stepped back inside, her worn boots echoing on the aged floorboards. "I am neither your servant nor your possession," she declared, her voice ringing clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. Thomas spun around, his face mottled red. "You ungrateful little—" "I am leaving," she stated, cutting him off. "I will no longer live under your oppression. You imagine the world will embrace a woman with no name, no resources, and no husband?" he sneered. "Walk out that door now and you are worthless. You will be back, crawling on your knees." "I would rather starve beneath the vast sky of the prairie than debase myself before you," she retorted. She stepped back into the sunlight, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. She had no destination in mind, but she possessed something far more valuable than security: her self-respect. Across the dusty street, a figure leaned against the weathered rail outside the blacksmith's forge, his gaze fixed on the unfolding drama. He was tall, possessing the muscular build of a seasoned ranch hand, and his weathered hat cast a shadow over a face etched with the marks of sun, hardship, and untold journeys. Sylvie recognized him instantly. He was known to everyone in Sweetwater Ridge. Preston Rowe, a respected and steadfast hand at the esteemed Whitaker Ranch, known for his unwavering loyalty to his boss and his steadfast commitment to his word, regardless of the cost. He pushed himself off the rail and crossed the street toward her. "Miss Gardner," he greeted, his voice deep and even. "Are you all right?" She drew a steadying breath and nodded. "I will be." He glanced back towards the store. "Your uncle appears to have a formidable temper." "He is a cruel and avaricious man," Sylvie responded, "but I am finished allowing him to dictate the course of my life." Preston studied her, his gaze unwavering. "Are you serious about this? Where do you plan to go?" "I do not know yet." He was silent for a moment, his gaze shifting to the dust swirling between them, before rising once more to meet her eyes. "I own a small cabin just beyond the ridge. It's secluded, safe. However, what I am about to suggest would be considered improper unless—" He paused, cleared his throat, then continued. "Sylvie, I am proposing marriage." She blinked, momentarily stunned. "What?" "What I mean is," he clarified, "I possess land, and I answer to no one. You would have a room of your own, a stable source of food and peace. If, after some time, you desired to leave, I would not stand in your way. However, if you married me, your uncle would relinquish any claim he believes he has over you." Sylvie stared at him, the rapid cadence of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he stated simply. "I have witnessed you carrying groceries for Widow Thorne, and I have seen you escort children home from school when the path grew dark. You are kind, you are brave, and you deserve a life far better than the one you have been forced to endure." She looked at his hands, calloused yet steady, and then met his gaze. There was not a trace of deception in his eyes. He spoke with genuine sincerity. "I do not seek charity," she declared. "This is not charity," he countered. "It is respect, and perhaps with time, it could evolve into something more if we both allow it." Her throat tightened, constricted by a wave of emotion. It had been years since she had shed tears, but something in his simple, honest words cracked the hardened shell around her heart. "I do not possess a proper dress," she whispered. "That is of no consequence to me." She glanced down the street. Her uncle remained inside the store, his tirade still audible. The world she had known was closing in around her, but perhaps something better, something fulfilling, awaited her beyond the ridge. She returned her gaze to Preston. "Very well." His brow rose slightly. "Very well?" "Yes," she affirmed. "I will marry you." The following morning they exchanged vows beneath the sprawling cottonwood tree behind the quaint church. Reverend Martin presided over the ceremony, reading from the holy book while half the town watched in hushed, astonished silence. Sylvie draped her mother's worn shawl over her shoulders, and Preston looked at her as if she were the most precious treasure he had ever laid eyes on. Afterward, he assisted her onto his horse with gentle care, and they rode off towards the ridge. The trail was quiet, steeped in the tranquility of the early morning. The sun climbed high behind them, and the wind carried the invigorating scent of sage and pine. The cabin was nestled in a secluded grove just off the main trail, consisting of a single room with a sturdy stone hearth, a welcoming porch swing, and a weathered barn standing guard out back. Preston lifted her down from the horse as if she were crafted from delicate glass, and she did not resist his touch. Inside, he set down her small satchel and stepped back, granting her space. "There's a spare key hidden beneath the windowsill. You can bolt the door from the inside. I will sleep in the barn if you require space." Sylvie turned to face him. "Preston." He looked up, uncertainty clouding his features. "I am not afraid of you," she said softly, "and I do not wish for you to sleep outside." He stood motionless for a moment, his eyes softening. "All right." That evening, they shared a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and black coffee on the porch, watching the sun dip below the ridge in a blaze of glory. Sylvie sat close enough to feel the comforting warmth radiating from his arm, and when he reached out and gently took her hand in his, she did not flinch or pull away. "I meant what I said," he repeated. "We can proceed at your pace with no pressure." She turned her hand in his, interlacing her fingers with his. "I know, but I do not wish to delay." He looked at her as if she had ignited the stars, and just like that, the peaceful existence she had never dared to dream of began, not with fanfare or grand pronouncements, but with a shared meal, a gentle touch, and the steadfast presence of a good man who had stepped forward when no one else would. And though she did not voice the words, Sylvie already felt the tender shoots of love taking root in her heart. The first few days unfolded in peaceful rhythm, marked by gentle mornings and the satisfaction of slow, deliberate work. Sylvie rose early, folding linens that still held the crisp scent of sun-drying, and swept the porch while Preston hauled water from the nearby spring that trickled behind the barn. He never touched her without seeking her permission, never raised his voice in anger, and never pried into her personal belongings. That simple respect alone soothed something deep within her that she hadn't realized was out of harmony. One afternoon, after returning from a tedious trek to examine fence posts along the north line, Preston entered the cabin, his shirt plastered to his back with sweat, his head bowed low. Fine dust traced the lines etched around his weary eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked, setting down the knife she had been using to peel apples. He leaned heavily against the doorframe. "Lost one of the yearlings. Found tracks near the gulch. Likely a cat." She crossed the room and reached for the tin basin, pouring in steaming water from the kettle. "Sit down. You need to cool off." He settled into the chair without protest as she wrung out a cloth and gently pressed it against the back of his neck. He let out a long, drawn-out breath that sounded more like gratitude than anything else. "Have you lost stock before?" she asked, re-wetting the cloth. "Plenty. It doesn't get easier, though." He looked up at her, his eyes tired but steady. Have you ever been out near the gulch?" "No, Mama never allowed me to stray too far past the cottonwoods," she replied. "She always said, 'The land remembers things.'" He nodded once, acknowledging her words. She was right. It's quiet out there, but far from empty. She folded the cloth and set it aside. "Would you like some help next time you ride out?" He tilted his head, considering her offer. "Do you know how to track?" "No," she said, a hint of amusement playing on her lips. "But I have a knack for spotting what doesn't belong, and I wield a rifle with reasonable skill." Preston tapped the table with one knuckle, a slow, thoughtful gesture. "I believe that. All right then, you ride with me tomorrow." That night, before sleep claimed them, she sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers along the hem of her simple nightgown. Preston was stretched out on the cot near the hearth, one arm serving as a pillow beneath his head. "Does it feel strange?" she asked softly. "Having someone else here, I mean?" "Somewhat," he admitted, "but not in the way I expected." She turned to face him. "How did you expect it to feel?" "Like sacrificing something," he confessed. "But it doesn't. It feels more like discovering something I didn't realize I was missing." She lay back, her eyes fixed on the rough-hewn rafters above. "I understand what you mean." The following morning dawned cool, the air thick with dewy moisture. Sylvie saddled the mare herself, cinching the girth with practiced movements. Preston observed her, offering no interference. Once they reached the gulch, the landscape transformed. The trees thinned, and the terrain dipped into a shallow ravine where scrub brush grew in tangled profusion. Preston dismounted, crouching near a muddy patch where hooves had churned the earth. "Here," he indicated, pointing. "See that drag mark? A broken leg, perhaps. Something pursued it relentlessly." Sylvie knelt beside him. "And this?" She traced a print in the soft soil, wider than a man's hand, with deep claw marks at the tips. "Mountain lion," he confirmed. "A sizable one." They followed the tracks east, moving at a deliberate pace. Sylvie kept her rifle across her lap, her gaze constantly scanning the ridge above. They discovered the calf a short distance away, dead and partially concealed beneath a tangle of loose brush. Preston crouched beside it, his expression somber. "Poor thing," he murmured. "Could have matured into a strong steer come spring." Sylvie looked up the slope. "Do you think it is still nearby?" "Possibly. Cats rarely stray far from their kills." She raised her rifle. "Then we must remain vigilant." They waited for a time, carefully watching the ridge. When nothing stirred but the wind rustling through the brush, Preston stood. "We'll return tomorrow, bringing the wagon to retrieve the carcass and burn it. We do not want the scent of decay attracting more scavengers." As they turned to leave, Sylvie said, "That was the first time I have seen something dead in such a way." Preston did not reply immediately. "The first time is always difficult, but you remained composed." She looked at him. "Did you doubt my ability to handle it?" "I was uncertain, but I am no longer." That night, after they had finished supper, Sylvie washed the trail dust from her hands and stepped out onto the porch. The evening sky was a deep, velvety violet, with the first stars beginning to glimmer into existence. She heard the door open behind her, followed by the soft click of it closing. "I used to believe that marriage meant relinquishing something," she said as Preston joined her. "Perhaps freedom, or solitude." He leaned against the rail, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "And now? I believe I was mistaken." He remained silent for a long moment, then reached out, took her hand and held it gently, as if it were a treasured artifact he had been longing to touch. "I want to build something here, not merely a home, but a life of lasting worth." She turned her hand in his, their fingers meshing together seamlessly. "Then let us build it together." He did not kiss her, not yet, but the silence that settled between them was comforting and full, like the rich earth after a refreshing rain, and Sylvie knew that this was more than mere safety. This was the genesis of something profound. The summer deepened, waves of heat radiating off the hills by mid-afternoon, and the air hung heavy with the fragrant resin of pine. Sylvie gradually adapted to the rhythms of the land, not effortlessly, but with unwavering determination. She became familiar with the weight of an axe in her hands and learned to distinguish the ominous hiss of a copperhead snake from the harmless rustle of dry grass. Her palms hardened, her back grew stronger, and the silence between her and Preston evolved into a comfortable companionship. One morning, just after sunrise, she discovered him bent over the wheel of the wagon, his sleeves rolled up past his elbows, grease smudged along his forearm. A crack had formed along the inside edge of the wheel's rim, and he was meticulously working a strip of rawhide into place. "Do you require an extra pair of hands?" she inquired. He sat back on his heels and glanced up at her. "Could you maintain a steady hold on the wheel while I bind it?" She stepped into position without hesitation, bracing herself against the wheel to keep it upright. He worked with focused intensity, his fingers moving with practiced precision, his breath coming in even rhythm. "I have been contemplating something," she began. "There is a schoolhouse in Dry Creek, only 2 miles east of here. They have not had a consistent teacher since the last one departed for Cheyenne." Preston continued his work, not pausing. "Are you considering teaching?" "I am giving it some thought," she confirmed. "I have always had an affinity for books. I could ride out there twice a week. It would provide me with something of my own." He nodded once, securing the rawhide. "If that is your desire, I will ensure that the mare is rested and ready on those mornings." She released the wheel, brushing dust from her skirt. "You do not object? I want you to have more than simply household duties and peace and quiet," he replied. "If you have a passion for teaching, you should pursue it." Later that week, she rode to Dry Creek with a satchel filled with well-worn readers and a handful of slate pencils tucked beneath her arm. The schoolhouse was a rudimentary structure, little more than a square box of lumber with a bell rope affixed above the door, but the walls were straight, and the stove retained the residual warmth of the last fire. The school board, consisting of 2 local ranchers and the widow who operated the post office, posed a few questions before assuring her that she would be well suited for the position. Upon returning home that evening, she found Preston splitting kindling near the barn. She dismounted and walked towards him, a cloud of dust swirling around her boots. "They have offered me the position," she announced. He rested the axe against the chopping block. "That is excellent," he replied, a genuine smile gracing his lips. She hesitated for a moment, then reached beneath her shawl and produced a folded piece of paper. "They also provided me with this, a list of the students' names. There is a boy named Jonas Bell. He is your neighbor's son, is he not?" Preston wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "He is the one with a sharp intellect but a distinct lack of patience for sitting still. I will ensure that he is kept occupied," she affirmed. That night, after the dishes had been washed and put away, and the fire had been banked low, Sylvie stood by the window, watching the clouds drifting across the starlit sky. Preston was seated at the table, meticulously mending a bridle strap by the soft glow of the lamplight. She crossed the room and sat beside him, resting her hands flat against the edge of the wooden surface. "Do you ever long for the life you had before this?" she asked. He looked up, a slight furrow creasing his brow. "Before what?" "Before me. Before the quiet underwent a transformation." He laid the strap aside and leaned back in his chair. "I used to believe that I would end up living out my days alone, not out of choice, but because I did not know how to truly open myself to another person. Now, I cannot imagine this place without you moving through it." She watched the lamplight dance in his hair, noticing how his hands stilled whenever he spoke with sincerity. "I never envisioned much for myself," she confided, "merely surviving, but now—" She paused, unsure how to articulate her feelings. Preston reached across the table and gently touched her wrist, his calloused thumb brushing against her skin. "Now you have the opportunity to begin anew, and you are not alone in that endeavor." She looked down at their hands, intertwined on the table. "I do not know if I will ever find it easy to express my feelings aloud." "You do not need to," he assured her. "You reveal your heart through the way you live." They remained seated in silence for a while, the lamp ticking softly as the flame flickered. When she rose, she did not immediately retire to bed. Instead, she turned to him and suggested, "Come, sit with me a while by the hearth." He rose without a word, and they settled on the floor, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder, his arm wrapped protectively around her back. The firelight painted dancing patterns on the walls, and the wind whispered through the pines outside, creating a soothing lullaby. It was not merely comfort that she felt. It was belonging, earned through mutual respect and affection, not given freely, and it settled around her like something permanent and unbreakable. As September approached, the ridge was bathed in golden light, and the wind carried the crisp scent of change. Sylvie woke before the sun crested the horizon and tied her hair back with a strip of cotton she had dyed with walnut husks. She had been riding out to Dry Creek twice a week, and the children had begun leaving her small tokens of their appreciation. A sprig of fragrant mint, a meticulously folded paper swan, a smooth, polished stone pressed shyly into her palm. She stored these treasures in a wooden box beneath the bed, where they remained untouched, but not unloved. Preston had also been rising earlier, harnessing the wagon before dawn to haul feed to the Whitaker stock pens, his shirts returning home stiff with sweat and dust. They rarely spoke in the mornings, but their shared silence had softened into something akin to a comfortable, unspoken understanding. One evening, as she rinsed flour from her hands by the pump, Sylvie heard the distinct sound of hooves crunching on the gravel near the barn. She dried her palms on her skirt and cautiously rounded the corner just as Preston was dismounting from his saddle. His jaw was set in a tighter line than usual, and his knuckles were white as he gripped the reins. "Something has happened?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. He nodded once, his movements slow and deliberate. "The sheriff stopped me on the road. Your uncle has been making inquiries again, telling people that he intends to contest the validity of the marriage, claiming that it was rushed and improper." Sylvie crossed her arms, a surge of anger coursing through her veins. "He has no grounds. He may not need them, not if he sows enough doubt. A circuit judge will be passing through before winter arrives. Your uncle is hoping to create enough of a stir to bring the matter before him." She did not respond immediately. The pump handle clinked softly in the wind. "He is not truly interested in me, is he? He desires the house, the root cellar, and the land upon which they stand." "That is likely the case," Preston agreed. "What do you want to do?" Her spine straightened, her resolve hardening. "I intend to speak with Reverend Martin. He presided over our wedding ceremony, and he will recall the events clearly." "I will ride into town with you," Preston offered, "not solely for your benefit, but for my own as well." The following afternoon, they sat across from the Reverend in the small parlor behind the chapel. The air in the room was scented with the subtle fragrance of beeswax and pipe tobacco, and the light filtering through the lace curtains cast long, striped shadows on the floor. Reverend Martin leaned forward, clasping his hands together on his knees. "I remember that morning vividly," he said. "You arrived with nothing but your love for each other and departed with your vows intact. I will testify to that under oath, should it become necessary." Preston nodded his gratitude. Sylvie turned to the Reverend. "Did my mother ever leave any documents with the church's records, perhaps a letter?" He blinked, momentarily surprised. "She entrusted me with a sealed envelope shortly before her passing, instructing me to deliver it to you when the time was right." He rose from his chair and crossed to a nearby bookshelf, retrieving a tin box. From within the box, he produced a yellowing envelope, her name inscribed in her mother's careful handwriting. Back at the cabin, she sat on the porch and unfolded the letter with trembling hands. Preston did not press her for details. He simply sat beside her, offering his silent support. "Sylvie," she said softly after a while. She stated that the land was legally deeded in her name alone and that she never signed it over to anyone else. She cautioned that if Uncle Thomas ever attempted to claim it, the records at the clerk's office in Cheyenne would confirm her ownership. Preston leaned against the porch railing. "Then we possess what we need." She looked over at him, the letter trembling slightly in her hand. "I had resigned myself to a life of constant flight, first from my grief and then from him. but I am no longer running." "No," Preston agreed. "You are not." That night, she brewed coffee over the fire while he diligently patched the saddle blanket. She placed 2 mugs on the table and sat across from him, cradling hers between both hands. "You know," she said, "when I first met you, I assumed that you were simply acting out of kindness, but you saw something of value in me before I had even realized what I had left to offer." He set his mug down. "I did not simply see something in you. I saw you, and I immediately recognized that you were someone worth standing beside." She reached across the table and rested her fingers on the back of his hand. "I do not want to live a life of compromises, not with you, and not with the life we are building together." His hand turned beneath hers, his fingers warm and reassuring. "Then do not." They retired to bed, leaving the window open to allow the cool night air to caress their skin, and when she pressed her head against his chest, she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a testament to a man who had chosen her, not for her past, but for the person she was destined to become. And somewhere in the darkness that surrounded them, a promise settled, unspoken, but deeply understood. This was home. This was theirs. The first snowfall of the season arrived early that year, swirling down in hushed spirals across the ridge, transforming the familiar landscape into a tranquil winter wonderland. Sylvie stood at the fence line behind the barn, her shawl pulled tight beneath her chin, watching as the sky faded to a pearly gray. A lone crow perched on a treetop above the spring, cawing raucously before taking flight, its black wings a stark contrast against the pristine white backdrop. The rhythmic clang of Preston's hammer echoed from within the lean-to, where he was diligently fitting new hinges to the grain chest. She allowed the sound to guide her back towards the cabin, her boots crunching softly on the packed snow. The aged boards creaked beneath her feet as she stepped onto the porch and opened the door. He straightened when he saw her, setting the hammer aside. "The wind is picking up. Do you sense a storm brewing?" She peeled off her gloves and rubbed her hands together. "A storm is imminent. I would estimate that we have a few hours before it settles in." He wiped his hands on a clean cloth, then reached for the remaining firewood stacked neatly by the hearth. "I will bring in the rest from the shed. We will want to keep it dry." She caught his sleeve before he could pass her. "Wait, there's something I need to show you first." He followed her to the table where she unwrapped a piece of folded oilskin she had taken from the cupboard and laid it flat. Inside were 3 pages, their edges worn with age, but the ink remained faded but legible. "The clerk in Cheyenne sent these by the freight wagon," she explained. "It took longer than I anticipated, but they are here now." Preston scanned the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. Deed confirmation, witness signatures, the official surveyor's seal. "It is all in my name," she stated, "but I want it to be in both of ours." He looked up slowly, his gaze searching her eyes. "Are you certain?" "I have no desire to keep any aspect of my life separate from yours," she affirmed. "Not now, not ever." He folded the papers with gentle care, then reached for her hand. "Very well. We will ride into town as soon as the roads are clear and have it officially recorded together." The wind howled against the shutters, then settled into a steady, mournful whistle. Preston tossed another log onto the fire. The flames caught quickly, casting dancing shadows across the floor. Sylvie drew the curtains closed and lit the lantern on the mantel as he secured the bolt on the door. "I have been giving something some thought," he said as he knelt to add kindling beneath the kettle. "If you are amenable to the idea, I could add a second room onto the back of the cabin come spring, just a small one. It would serve as a suitable space if we ever had need of it." She stilled, her hand resting on the back of the chair. "Are you referring to children?" He kept his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "Only if that is something you also desire. I have known men who forced their wives to bear child after child without considering their readiness or willingness. I refuse to be one of those men." She stepped closer to him, her voice soft but resolute. "I have been ready for a long time. I simply was not aware of it until this place gave me the space to feel it." He looked up then, and whatever response he had intended to give her vanished between them. She leaned down and kissed him, slowly and deliberately, a kiss that settled deep into their souls. "I am grateful that we waited," she murmured afterward, "for this moment." "You were worth the wait," he replied. They retreated into the warm embrace of the firelight, his arms wrapped securely around her, her breath soft against his neck. Outside, the wind sang a haunting melody through the trees, but inside, everything felt secure and complete. By morning, the world was transformed into a silent, pristine expanse of white. Preston walked the fence line with the dog trotting faithfully behind him, checking for any signs of damage. Sylvie boiled oats on the stove and stirred in dried apples she had saved from the fall harvest. After breakfast, they sat by the hearth with steaming mugs of chicory and watched the snow drift past the window. Preston reached into the satchel near the door and produced something wrapped in burlap. He handed it to her without a word. She unwrapped it slowly, her heart filled with anticipation. Inside was a book, its cover bound in worn leather, the title pressed faintly in gold lettering, Spencer's Practical Composition and Grammar. "I noticed it in the Mercantile," he said. "I thought your students might find it useful, or perhaps you might be inspired to write something of your own one day." She touched the aged cover with reverence. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You always seem to know what I need before I am even aware of it myself." "That simply comes with time," he replied. "Time and attentive observation." Later, as the snow deepened and the light softened to a muted blue, they lay beneath the quilt she had stitched together from her mother's old dresses. Preston's hand rested gently over hers, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. "Do you think we will grow old here?" she asked softly. "I see no reason why not," he replied. "The land is fertile, the roof is sturdy, and we have enough love between us to last a lifetime." She smiled, her cheek resting against his shoulder. "Then let us grow old right here." And they did. Years passed, and the second room was built, complete with a window that faced the east pasture. A cradle stood against the far wall, meticulously carved by Preston's own hands, its rockers worn smooth from use. Sylvie taught at the schoolhouse for the next decade, riding back home by dusk to find the lamps lit and supper warming on the stove. The land provided a stable foundation beneath their feet, and the wind that had once carried a sense of foreboding softened into a gentle, comforting song. They planted apple trees, kept bees, and learned to interpret the sky like sacred scripture. And when their hair turned silver and the days began to slow, they still rose each morning with their hands joined beneath the quilts, the silence between them filled with the accumulated weight of a life built on love and mutual respect. Love, in the end, was not a sudden, dramatic event. It was a roof well maintained, a fire tended before dawn, a cherished letter kept safe in a drawer. It was the quiet, deliberate choice to love one another day after day, until that choice became the very essence of their life together, and that life was whole. So, as we see in Sylvie and Preston's story, love isn't always a grand, sweeping romance. Sometimes it's found in the quiet moments, in the everyday choices we make to support and cherish one another. It's about respect, partnership, and building a life together, brick by brick, with kindness and commitment. Their journey reminds us that even from the dust and hardship, a beautiful and lasting love can bloom. What did you think of Sylvie and Preston's story? What resonated with you the most? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, or anything else this story sparked for you. And if you enjoyed this and want to hear more stories like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future uploads.